Hello, everyone, and welcome to Growing Together, a gardening podcast with me, John Lamb, and Don Kinzler, a lifelong gardener and the North Dakota State University Extension horticulturist from Cass County. Don, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Well, before we get started, I want to tell people that this podcast is sponsored by Bloomfield Garden Center, a family-owned retail greenhouse providing locally grown plants since 1974. And you can find them 1 mile south of Sabin, Minnesota, or 6 miles south of I-94 off exit 6, just a quick drive from Fargo-Moorhead. Hey, Don, what do you call a person who buys all the shrubbery at the garden center?
I'm not sure. What would you call a person that buys all the shrubbery at a garden center?
I'd call that person a hedgehog.
That's true. Good.
I thought we'd start with that joke, but it's a garden center joke because we have a fellow, longtime avid gardener and former garden center greenhouse owner, operator, Mary Holm with us this week. Mary, if you're like me, if listeners are like me, I was first introduced to Mary when she had our friend Dawn featured on her PBS show, Prairie Yard Gardens, about 2 months ago. The show was recently picked up by Prairie Public for our regional viewers, and older episodes can also be found on YouTube. So, Mary, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's nice of you to be here, and I know that you had to travel in a little bit, so I appreciate you making the time.
Oh, no problem. I'm an early riser, and so and it was a beautiful day for a drive, so it was great.
It is. We've got great weather, so let's just jump right into it. So, what is Prairie Yard and Garden? Talk a little bit about this show.
Prairie Yard and Garden is a series dedicated to horticulture and improving horticulture knowledge in the upper Midwest, because you can read Better Homes and Gardens and some other wonderful magazines. You can see great ideas on Pinterest. But, we do have a winter up here that does not match some of the other things that people in the other parts of the country have to deal with. And so, like Don knows, there are some things that are hardy here and some things that are not. And so Prairie Yard and Garden is a show that has been on for 37 years. We're working on the 37th season right now, and it's kind of dedicated to all things gardening and horticulture.
Two things that I love about the program. One, of course, is it is so practical. It gives such good gardening information for us right here in the upper Midwest. The other thing I love about it, besides the information, is the inspiration. I mean, you can watch those and you can say, wow, I can do this. I can grow this right here in our area.
Because it's also, while it's a larger area, it's not just the Fargo-Moorhead area, but it's all Zone 4, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And there's been a couple of years back, which is more than a couple already now, we went out to the Peace Garden and we did a show out at the Peace Garden. And then we did one on the cactus display out there. And then we did another show at Carrington, at the Research Center at Carrington, where they do a marvelous job on small fruits. And so that was really interesting, too.
Yeah, and so the show is not just going to people's homes like Don's homes. You're going to, like you just said, research centers. You're going to the Peace Gardens. You also did one recently. It was a memorial garden?
Yes.
Talk about that a little bit.
We've had more comments on the memorial garden, and part of that was inspired by we have a neighbor, and they were one of the families that we interviewed for that show. And they lost their son to cancer. And I also knew of another family that they had lost their son to suicide. And then I'm a big reader, and I had read an article in the Grand Forks Herald about a family up by Wadena who had lost their son in a car accident. And it just so happened to be that all of them were boys, or children were boys that the families had lost. But they had all created gardens in memory of their children. And I just thought that would make a neat show. And so we did. We visited with all three of those families, and we went out to see their gardens. And like somebody told me, people deal with pain and loss in many different ways. And here they have channeled it to create a beautiful place that they can remember and dedicate to their family member, and then other people can also stop and enjoy it too. And it's probably been the show that I have received the most comments about. It turned out beautifully.
I would imagine a space like that, you want to design it with the main idea being kind of reflection, a place to go and to remember the person and to think about things. But was there anybody who used it as an opportunity to grow produce as a way to honor somebody's life, is to grow something, food or something like that?
Mostly no produce, but a lot of flowers.
Yeah.
And then the one family that lost their son to suicide, they wanted a place that would be kind of divided from the surrounding area. So they created used a lot of native grasses that get nice and tall with benches. And so you can sit in there and the grasses can surround you and kind of shelter you and enclose you and just let you sit there with your thoughts. And so that family did that. The family up at Wadena, they created a lot of flowers and planted a lot of plants in memory of their son. And also she said that she had gone out to take flowers to the cemetery one day and a dragonfly came and sat on the flowers. And so she has incorporated a lot of dragon flowers into her memory garden because she felt like it was a sign from her son that he was there when she was there too. And the other people in Morris, whose son died of cancer, when he died, he didn't want flowers at the funeral because he wanted people to donate for cancer research, because he knew he was dying and he had told his folks that. And so then, but people had already ordered a lot of flowers, and so the greenhouse said, well, how about if we divert those and we buy plants instead? And so they created these plants that people had given in memory of their son, and they incorporated all those plants into this beautiful flower area. And their son loved sports and played baseball. And so they used his bats to actually create a small ball field in the flower bed, and used his bats and their son's friends' bats. And so they have a little area that looks like a ball field with bats as the borders. And then they actually use the home team flowers that they plant. And so, it's just, and then beautiful statues that they would wake up in the morning and people had dropped off a statue or an angel or things. And so those were all incorporated into the beds, and it's just beautiful, and it's a wonderful place to go, and it's so great for them too.
Well, I can see why that would be the most viewed or most popular podcast program that you've done. I can see. And any of us who enjoy gardening can totally relate to how important that is, the planting.
Just to have that personal touch and to being able to see something that, my girlfriend and I, we know kind of like each one of us has a particular flower or color or things that we like. So it's nice to have those things as kind of a reminder.
I can see why they're called healing gardens, because there's just something with nature, the plants, et cetera, that just heal a person. So I can see. That's awesome.
Well, and I love that idea too of having these big native grasses in there that not only, like you said, just kind of encompass you but then also offer a little sense of privacy too, that if you really want to be alone, you have the sense that it's not like being lost in a corn maze, but you do have this sense, and also just the gentle rustling when the wind comes, something like that. I also really love the idea of the finding the dragonfly. And I think it would be, something, you could also plant things that would attract pollinators, but also would attract butterflies.
Exactly.
It would really be wonderful.
And Mary, I can see why you were so good on that program, because you've painted wonderful pictures. As you were describing, I could see it in my head.
Yeah. How did you get involved with the show?
Well, my husband and I had a greenhouse up at Nitchie, North Dakota for many years. And then Tom was offered a position to grow flowers for the University of Minnesota at Morris. They have a beautiful horticulture display garden, and I invite people to come down there because it is just beautiful.
That's a great display garden.
It is. It is. And so then we moved down there, and I happened to visit with a fellow who was involved with the show. One day he was helping me do a newsletter because Miss Technology I am not. And so I was visiting with him, and I knew his host wanted to retire, his current host. And so as I was getting ready to go, I said, "So did you find a new host?" And he said, "Yes, I did." And so I said, "That's great. That would be a fun job," I said. And so I went my way, he went his way. And about a month later, he called me up and he said, "You know, Mary, remember that day you said that would be a fun job? How would you like to do that?" Because the new host had real serious medical issues that had developed and could not continue. And so, oh man, that was a mad scramble. We did 10 shows in a month and a half that we lined up, filmed, and got done.
So did you say yes immediately, or did you have to
Well,
think?
I said,
Because that's wonderful.
Well, no, I just said, well, we'll try it. You know, you make do
That's
it.
great.
And so we did it. And as we were driving home after the last show, I said, "So what do you think?" He said, well, how would you like to keep doing it? And he's been stuck with me ever since. So
36th, you're in your 37th year now?
37th year, but I've been involved in since 2014.
Okay.
So it originally started out as being a studio show.
Okay.
So they would get people from the University of Minnesota or NDSU or area gardeners or extension people to come in and do the show right at the studio. And then maybe about, 15 years ago, they went out and started to do on-site shows, and people really liked that.
On location is awesome.
Yeah, and so then it's been ever since. And so we film 13 shows each year, and we usually do them in the summer months, and then the fall and winter are used to edit the shows, and then they usually start airing about January 19th and 20th in that time frame, and they wrap up the end of April, and then they start over again. So then they'll just air all over again.
And of course, a lot of these programs are timeless,
Yeah.
They are.
aren't they?
Yeah.
They have a shelf life of decades, probably.
Yep, and that's the intent. I'm never supposed to say a year when we're talking about it so that they can be evergreen. I think this is the correct term.
Good term.
And so, so they're still as good now as ever. Many of the shows are. And we have such great people that are on the show. So many great people.
And here in Fargo-Moorhead, we can watch this on Prairie Public Broadcasting. What's the station that you work with?
It is Pioneer PBS, and it used to be at Appleton, and then they moved their headquarters to Granite Falls, and so they broadcast out of there. But with all this modern technology, now you can even watch the shows online and on YouTube too. And so, we did a show, and coming up on that will be in your broadcast area, Utterly Beautiful. And it was a dairy farm. And that lady, between her flowers and her calves and milking the cows, I think that's all that she does. But her yard was absolutely stunning. And she is out there from morning to night and grows her own flowers, and she buys some.
Catchy title, utterly beautiful for a cow planting situation.
Well, they were kind of part of the stars of the show too.
I believe it.
Yeah, it was fun.
I bet that'll be another popular episode.
It is. It has been, and people will really enjoy it.
Well, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be talking more with Mary Holm and Prairie Yard Garden.
Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month. You'll get unlimited access to the news you need to stay engaged and connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe now to get 3 months of local news for only 99 cents a month.
So we're back with Mary Holm of Prairie Yard Garden on Prairie Public TV. So you worked for so long in your own greenhouse, owning the Nietzsche greenhouse for, was it 20 years?
Over 20 years.
Over 20 years. Mm-hmm. Is it fun now to get out of to essentially get out of the office and go to other people's homes or even other businesses or other greenhouses and other growing centers? How much fun is it to get out and get on the road?
Well, my husband and I are both supposedly retired, but our kids say we suck at retirement because we're still back helping at the research station. And after we moved to Morris, I started to work at a native plant nursery.
Okay.
I am proof that you can teach an old dog new tricks because that is a whole different ballgame. Those native plants, they will keep you humble and they'll teach you a whole new lesson.
So what are you learning there?
Well, you know, when we had our greenhouse and you go and you plant a flat of marigolds, and Don, you will know this too. 10 days later, you have this beautiful even crop of marigolds that are just all the same height. When you have native plants, number one, most of them you have to stratify. You have to put them into a cold place or refrigerator for a certain length of time. So they think they've gone through the winter, the seeds do. And then when you plant them and about, 10 days later, you'll have one plant come up. And 2 weeks later, you'll have 3 or 4 plants come up. And then you might have 20 plants come up. But that was their survival mechanism. And so if they grew and one came up and the conditions weren't right, then it would be okay. So you have this uneven germination, and that's how they survived over the centuries.
Isn't that awesome, the way nature has some of these built-in survival mechanisms?
Exactly.
Because even though they were the same type of seed, same species,
exactly,
they have this kind of regimented, spaced germination.
Yeah, that's right. And so they drive my husband nuts because he did most of the planting at the greenhouse. But and their growth, at the nursery where I work, we never use chemicals or anything like that because they kind of have this built-in immunity to a lot of insects or disease. And so they kind of, and you don't fertilize them. And there was one day that I was working at the nursery and this man came in, he pulled in. So I said, "Can I help you?" Because I was just walking out to the greenhouse. And he said, "I'm here to complain about those plants you sold me last year." And I said, "Oh, what happened?" And he said, "They grew." And so I must have had the strangest look on my face because he started laughing. And he said he wanted plants. I remembered him. He wanted plants to put in his backyard that would attract butterflies. And he had a fence and he wanted to plant them there near the fence. So we had picked out plants for him the year before. Well, he'd taken them home, and he had treated them like regular bedding plants. He watered them every week. He fertilized every other week. And those plants grew, and they got as tall as his fence and kept on going. And so he ended up having to tie them up because they got so tall. The natives have such a deep root system that they're used to fending themselves. Yeah. And so if you treat them like that, they just grow so tall and so unnaturally. So he was back to get more plants to fill in some more space, but this time he was not going to fertilize and he was just going to water them in to get started. So they're a whole different ballgame than what I was used to.
And of course, natives are very popular now. There's a movement to plant more natives, and with good reason, because they're so well adapted, naturally, natively to our area, to our soil, our climate.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
But I suppose that's something that people like me who, are a relatively new gardener should be aware of. If you're working with native plants, to take that into consideration, that they're used to, these plants know to grow on their own, essentially once after they're set in and get started, but they probably don't need the care that we normally would and the tending to of another plant. Very interesting.
Yep, you're so right, and that's why they kind of recommend them for shoreline restoration. Because they put on their deep roots to help hold the shoreline in place, and you don't have to put on chemicals and fertilizer that might leach into the waters. And so you're so right. And so you can.
And for us home gardeners with that deep root system, it means that they don't need such constant water that some of the other things do. So even for maybe a lower maintenance situation, their deep root system is advantageous.
You're right. And there's a lot of different ones to choose from, too. Mm-hmm.
How far do you travel for the show? I mean, how far do you go from area to area? Because it sounds like it's pretty well spread out. It's a pretty good coverage area.
Well, we're in North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, northern Iowa, and western Wisconsin. And so we've tried to kind of cover those areas because there's wonderful gardeners and wonderful resource people in all of those. And kind of when you get to be as old as me, you kind of get to know a lot of those people. And so we'll travel. We've done some shows in Duluth, and we've gone out to the Peace Garden. And, I grew up in Strasburg, so that's kind of the prairie area is dear to my heart. And then we've tried to go to Sioux Falls, had a wonderful program down there, or several now, and then kind of all parts of Minnesota too.
Where do you get the ideas for the programs?
Well, I'm a pretty prolific reader, and so
do people ever come to you and say, "Oh, hey, my neighbor, man, you've got to do a program there"?
Yep. The lady that we did the show with, Utterly Beautiful, it was her neighbor who called in and said, "You should go and see our neighbor's yard." I've had people from the Twin Cities. There was a family who videotaped and sent me a YouTube tape of their yard. And after seeing that, it was kind of like, oh, yeah, we got to go there. And it was as fabulous as they said. And then there's just, I just happen to be out and about, and I'll say, man, that's a neat yard. And I'll just stop and ask, and I'll say, would you ever consider being on a show with me? And so it's all over, or people will say, so-and-so is really good and has a beautiful yard, or people will write to me. And so I just appreciate the ideas.
I bet there's no shortage, is there? Do you ever have any problem with programs?
No,
there's
not
probably
really.
more than what a person can even have program space for.
There's
a lot of good gardening that goes on in this area.
Exactly. We've got a lot of good plant people. And so I keep a sheet and from year to year, and we try to do 4 shows with the industry and 4 shows with home gardeners, and then 4 shows with public research or extension. And then we do 1 arts and crafts show each year as part of the legacy show through Minnesota.
We talked about the Memorial Garden Show earlier. What other gardens have really stuck with you? What other visits have really stuck with you throughout the years? And has there ever been one that you've gone back to visit just on your own time?
This past winter, we did a fundraising segment for Pioneer PBS, and we went back and we revisited with people that had been on the show before, and it was just marvelous to see the changes they had made or how their business had changed. And so, yes, we have gone back and enjoyed that immensely. And we just get to see a couple of years ago, last year, we also had a show, another one, that was so wonderful up at Herman, Minnesota, which is between here and Morris. And there's a lady there named Rita Kaiser, and she has a big ash tree in her backyard, and it's kind of got a raised bed around that ash tree. And she allows her grandkids and kids from town and surrounding communities to come and create a little garden area or a fairy garden area are under that tree or by that tree. I think there was like 20 to 30 kids ranging from 4 to 20 something that all come, and they have their own little space with their name in it. And there's rules, so they can go and they can rearrange their fairy garden stuff as much as they want throughout the season, but they can't touch anybody else's. And, you know, some of those kids maybe don't have a lot of support at home, but they've got a place at Rita's place that they can go and they can work with their plants. And one boy had done a golf course, and one had done a farmyard, and one had done a camping site. And one girl did a beautiful job with a broken pot and making it into a fairy house. You know, those kids, they were so much better than I could ever do anything. It was great to see.
Well, and what's great about that too is that you know that opportunity, getting younger people, just you know whether they keep up an interest in it or not, but giving them that exposure. Like you said, that there's a lot of good gardeners, a lot of great gardens in the area, but you know not everybody has access to a garden. People who live in an apartment, or people who maybe they just don't want to deal with it. They don't like spending time outside or whatever. So that's really kind of a great thing, that to give that opportunity to kids to have that exposure to working in the dirt and working with the ground and plants. And I think that's really fun.
Well, and Don's done some segments on container gardening too. And so that opens up a whole new world, even if you've got a balcony or a small planting area, that you can still do those things.
There's something for everybody, isn't there? Even apartment dwellers, you know, I always say gardening is something for everybody, even if you don't have a whole yard.
Exactly.
What inspiring ideas have you brought back to your own garden? Or like you said, are you and your husband so bad at retirement that you don't have time to garden at home?
Well, I see plants that I really like to try, and so I have. But right now we're in this kind of people said, oh, I bet your yard is beautiful. And it is not. Because, well, part of it is that we had to tear up our whole backyard and redo and put a septic mound, a brand new septic mound. So that wiped out all of the landscaping we had done for 15 years. That all had to get torn up in my garden and everything too. So we now have a blank slate, and we're waiting for everything to settle, and then we can start. Before the project started, we dug up 56 perennials and shrubs and moved them to a nursery area. And so now after things get settled, then we can start re-landscaping.
Well, that sounds like my wife and I 6 years ago. We did that whole thing. So you could have, you're describing what we did 6 years ago.
Yeah, but your place looks so nice compared to ours.
Well, yours will in 6 years then.
It's surprising, but it's interesting. You mentioned your years in the garden center. I'm curious, and of course our years that my wife and I had at garden centers for 20 some years. And of course, we loved the experience, loved the people, loved growing the plants. One thing we really enjoy now, though, not having the garden center, is we have some time for ourselves to plant. We get our garden planted, May, maybe the first week in June. When we had the garden center, we were so busy taking care of everybody else's that sometimes it was 4th of July when we finally got a garden center. And can you relate?
Absolutely. We always figured that was our first day off, would be the 4th of July.
To get your garden in.
Yep. No, I got the garden in earlier because Tom was real good about, we had wonderful employees. And so they would understand if I'd say, you guys, I got to go home and I want to plant our garden.
Because it's fun to have your own, too.
Oh, yeah. We had kind of a big backyard. And so we had a garden there, too.
How did you get interested in gardening? Did that start when you were a kid in Strasburg?
Yes. We pretty much grew almost everything that we ate because we had dairy cows that we milked by hand. We had beef cattle, and we had hogs. We had chickens. So we had our chickens and our eggs, and then we had a garden close to the yard that we could water, and then we had a pumpkin patch out in the field, and we had a sweet corn patch out in the field, and we had a potato patch out in the field. So, now they call it a local foods movement. Heck, we were in style way back before that even got to be a thing, because we pretty much lived off of our farm.
Yeah, and doesn't that get into your blood? Like when you garden at a young age, when you see the vegetables growing and just everything in the produce, and you're eating what you're growing, and that gets in your blood never to leave.
I know
you're
it did
right. Mine.
Yep. And canning, that's just a part of life now, is that you got to can your tomatoes and make salsa and all of that stuff. So, yep.
All right, we're going to take another quick break, and when we come back, more with Mary Holm of Prairie Yard Garden.
When you can't make it to City Hall or school board meetings, local journalists from Inforum.com will be there to report the facts and get your questions answered. Local news works for you. Stay up to date at Inforum.com.
All right, we're back with Mary Holm. And Mary, with all of your experience in gardening, what's the best piece of advice you could give a gardener?
Listen to Don Kinzler's show and read his columns. Because
I listen to your show. How is that?
Because I always, I agree with that. Sometimes I will see things online, or I'll see things in the paper, and it's kind of like, oh. But you know what you're talking about. And so I really agree with the things that you say, much more so than things that are put out by maybe people that aren't in our area. So,
but isn't it fun? I always just say we're all in this together. It's fun to share the information.
How has your approach to gardening changed over the years?
Well, of course, I always used to till the garden, and then one year I went to a Sustainable Plant Society meeting, and there were some people speaking there from Dickinson, North Dakota, and they mulch their garden and don't till it. And I came home from that winter meeting and I said, Tom, I'd like to try something. And of course, every once in a while he rolls his eyes, but okay. And so we put the garden in, didn't till it, and then each year he takes grass clippings and he takes like the first mowing that's got lots of leaves and grass clippings, and he puts them on a pile for me. And so then I took those clippings and I put them pretty deep on the garden. And by about the second or third year of doing that, we had the softest, best soil there. And so we haven't tilled the garden since.
Yeah, that's quite a movement, no-till gardening. I'm not quite there yet because our Red River Valley clay is so heavy, but I'm going to try that. So you've inspired me. I want to try that. What's your soil like, out of curiosity?
It's pretty good soil.
Good soil.
It's pretty good soil.
So I'm curious. Yeah, because that is such a good movement now, kind of the no-till, and it's kind of maybe a little more natural. I mean, it's not kind of natural that you keep digging your soil like we do. No-till farming is just customary now, or little till, minimum till.
Well, I'll still hoe if I get weeds. I'll hoe a little bit, but when I put those clippings on or that mulch on that deep, then I don't really get a whole lot of weeds that come up. And then if it rains, I can still walk in on top of those clippings. And by the fall, most of those have decomposed, and it's kind of cleaned off.
And I've heard such good reports just like yours of that really improves the soil.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then you aren't bringing weed seeds back up to the surface either, because some of those weed seeds will last decades down in the soil. And if you're tilling, you're bringing those weed seeds up. So even weed seeds don't, we aren't bringing that bank of weed seeds up to the surface either.
Mm-hmm. I do have to probably fertilize a little bit more because the soil organisms are working hard to break down all those grass clippings, and I don't want my nitrogen tied up all the way. And so, I'll probably fertilize a little bit more. But then after the second, third, fourth years, when you've got that soil pretty nice and rich, then you've got the nutrients. But I still try to fertilize a little bit.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's inspiring.
When you talked about the using the lawn clippings and the from the first mowing, so do you put those down right over the soil, and then do you put mulch on top of that, or do you put that down like as the mulch, as the barrier, and as the interesting.
That's the mulch and the barrier, and it maybe doesn't work for everybody, but it worked great. It has worked great for us, and it helps hold in the moisture, which is great for this year when it's so doggone dry. Because we haven't had rain down there by us. We're really dry. And it helps with keeping the plants cooler and keeping the weeds down. And so it's kind of a good thing. And I still have to do that now, because now that the plants are coming up, now I can see where my rows are, and then I can go take those clippings and put them down. And with the first clippings, there's been no spray on them or anything. And plus it also includes the leaves from the leaf litter from fall. So it's, pretty good mulch there in the garden.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Something that people can look forward to and try. So we'll kind of wind down the show here with just a couple of some kind of fun questions. Nothing too hard hitting here or anything like that. But if let's say, so you've got your garden next year you'll be able to start your garden. So, but if you were to do a garden just for 1 year, what would you do? Would you do a flower garden or a vegetable garden?
Oh, I'm lucky because our neighbors saw our plight and they offered me part of their garden, so I can still garden, even though a vegetable garden. I have one at our neighbors next door, gave me part. And if I have to plant a vegetable, it's got to be tomatoes.
Tomatoes, okay.
Tom hates tomatoes.
Oh,
and he's always
divided.
I know, but that leaves more for me. And I love tomatoes. A tomato sandwich is my lunch from July until October. And so I love tomatoes. So that's going to be the one plant that's going to be in the garden.
Do you have a favorite variety of tomato, or what's the one that you tend to? Which ones are you drawn to?
Well, I like Celebrity. That's a good old all-American selection
my number
sweater.
one.
Okay, but there's so many good ones to try. So I always
Big
have
Beef. Have you tried
Yep,
Big Beef?
Yep,
Another all-American
yep.
winner.
And so I usually have some Celebrity and a Big Beef and maybe a Better Boy.
What's your favorite cherry tomato? Out of curiosity.
Well, I like Juliet because it doesn't crack as easily. This year I tried yellow pear just because I wanted to try that again.
That gives like a million little yellow pears.
You pray for frost just to kill that plant.
Sun sugar. Ever tried sun sugar? That's one of my favorites.
No, I've not tried it yet.
Yeah, that's one that you turned me on to, Don. That is a great one.
Nice one.
That's I would say if you've got room in your neighbor's garden to try it, try a sun sugar.
Okay. And then flowers, we've got a retaining wall, and so that is usually full of flowers.
So you talked about your favorite vegetable to grow. This may be controversial. What's your favorite flower?
Can't pick one, but if it blooms blue, everybody that knows me knows that I love the color blue. And so I always have to have some blue flowers. And, oh gosh, I can't pick a favorite.
You must have iris then. There are so many beautiful blue shades of iris.
Yes, there are some that are just finishing up at our yard now. But, there's petunias and salvia. We love hummingbirds.
A blue marigold. You need to develop a blue marigold. I think that there are none, are there? No, not even close.
No.
Yeah.
But we always have to have salvia for our little hummers.
Oh, yeah.
They're great.
The hummingbirds. Excuse me, the
Blue
hummingbirds.
salvia is one of my favorites.
Yeah, they're wonderful. I've got more that I bought that I still have to plant.
I like both the annual Victoria type blue salvia as well as there are so many good perennial type blue salvia.
We have those in our yards too, so great minds think alike.
You talked about how tomato is your favorite thing to grow. It's not Tom's at all. What's one vegetable that people like to grow that never appealed to you, or that you just never you don't feel any need to grow?
Well, you can see that I'm a little rotund, so that I don't think I've ever met a vegetable that I didn't like. So,
How about kale and Brussels sprouts?
Yeah, they're good.
Yeah, you go. I haven't gotten around to growing either one of those in ours. I need to.
Oh, I don't
'Cause they're
necessarily.
healthy.
Yeah, they're very
Kale
healthy.
can be. I'm not a big fan. I still haven't found a good way to. My girlfriend will use kale in things, but I do not I don't have a taste for it. Brussels sprouts I love, but kale is such a pretty plant. It is. I mean, because now now there's a lot of ornamental kales that are grown strictly as, but they really are just, I admire them even as a plant that I do not like to eat.
Fresh kale with ranch dressing.
Well,
how is that?
Along in with your salad, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
What's a flower or a plant that people love to grow that you've just never, it wasn't for you?
Oh, that's kind of the same shape with a vegetable. I don't know if I've ever seen a flower that I didn't like.
Yeah, it's kind of like trying to pick which of your children don't you like.
That's right. I know.
Well, there are some things like marigolds seem to be really divisive. Some people really like them, and some people just want nothing to do with them. That's what I've heard. People just seem to be. Some people don't like them at all, and some people, yeah. So.
Well, about the end of April, I was speaking to a group down in Mankato, and they were kind of saying that, scilla or squill are a little plant, and they can really get carried away, and people shouldn't be planting them. And I said, but it's blue.
And it's one of the first bits of color in our yard, yeah.
Yeah, so, I think they were created for a reason to give us pleasure in one way or another, and so I just really have never met a flower I didn't like either.
How about Creeping Charlie has a nice little blue blossom?
Yeah, I know.
Okay, well that brings on another question. What weed is your nemesis? We talked a little bit about this last week.
Oh, purslane is such
Yeah, isn't that the truth? You can hoe it and it re-roots. It'll even revert, you flip it on its back thing and it'll rewrite itself and root again. Isn't that a nuisance?
I have a 5-gallon pail that I take with me whenever I go weeding.
Yeah, amen. Yeah,
you
have to physically remove that.
Exactly right. Some people say they eat it. I've not ever eaten it. Have you?
With ranch dressing.
Okay.
It was tasty with ranch.
Okay, but I've not ever gotten to eat that. But that one is such a pain in the tush that it is.
They can, where it's hot, where it's dry, they don't need moisture. Yeah, they just thrive.
And those darn wild violets. Oh, they get
That's
every
another
place.
one.
Yep, every place. They just. So those are some of my least favorite ones.
Finish this sentence. Weeding is
relaxing.
Interesting comment. I find the same. Yeah. I find it kind of like eating popcorn. Once you start, then it's, you get them when they're little and small, and you can see what you've done. And when you get them when they're small, it's not difficult to weed or hoe. It is. That's an interesting comment. Yeah. There was another term that first came to my mind when you said weeding is. Yeah. But no, I can relate.
Yeah. Well, another thing is, nobody else in the family like to do it, so it was a time to be left alone.
Well, and when you're weeding in the vegetable garden and you get them when they're tiny, it's not difficult work, and you're getting ahead of the game. Or if, like the perennial garden, where the weeds have maybe gotten big and you're getting them out of there, you feel like you're rescuing that perennial.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And when you stab down your digger and you get the whole dandelion to pop out, it's kind of like...
Yeah, that is a job well done.
When you're working in the garden, do you use a kneeler or knee pads?
Well, I'm a greenhouse person, so my knees are kind of shot. And so I usually sit and scoot along. And so I do use knee pads. But for the most part, I kind of scoot on my behind.
Guess what I bought this year?
What's that?
A kneeling bench, a gardener's kneeling bench. And gosh, those are handy. I can scoot along, kneel down, that boosts me back up. Mm-hmm. And so like I mentioned, Mary, I don't care what it looks like anymore. I'm going with this kneeling bench.
So does it have like arms on the side to support you when you push yourself up?
The bottom is cushioned.
Yeah.
And you can bring that next to your weeded area, and it's wonderful.
Sounds smart.
But knee pads also.
Yep.
I do use those.
Yep. I did a show last year with a fellow who is 90 plus years old, and a gardening show, and he was telling me, my friend and I are going to put stakes throughout the garden. And I said, why? And he said, well, when I can't stand up anymore, then I'm going to crawl over to one of the stakes. Then I can still stand up. I can use that. So at 90 plus years, he's not planning to quit at all.
And he's thinking. He's thinking ahead. I love that.
How he can keep on.
That's awesome.
I remember watching some British movie probably about 20 years ago, but there was an older woman and she was in her garden, and so she was having trouble, bending over. So what she did is she would pick like one of those movable ironing boards. So not the ones that totally fold out, but like have the short little legs.
Oh, yeah.
And she would put that down, then she would lay on top of it. And then as she sunk into the ground, then she would push herself up and move along. And I thought that's just a scene. I can't remember what the movie is, but that scene really stuck with me. What's your favorite garden tool?
Probably my hoe.
Okay.
I've got
the right weeding hoe, a well-sharpened hoe.
And it's got a small blade.
Exactly. That'll skim through the soil surface so easily.
Yep.
Well, you may have talked about this earlier with the no-till gardening, but what development or innovation or change of thought in gardening has made your life better?
I don't know about my own life, but just one good thing out of the pandemic is it brought people back to nature and gardening and plants. And so in a broad general sense, I think that has benefited so many people so well that it's brought them back in tune with nature and gardening.
That's been very visible, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Just a dramatic upturn in gardening. Kind of like bringing back the Victory Garden type thing. And everything from houseplants to flowers to a whole new appreciation of gardening.
Exactly.
Well, and now doing things that are more not intended just for your own personal benefit, but pollinator gardens or water retention pond areas, things like that, or different drainage, I should say, different things like that are meant to have an impact on the community too. It's really kind of great. Speaking of that, of the kind of the boom in gardening with the pandemic, what do you see? Do you see a difference in newer gardeners like myself, somebody who's been doing it less than 10 years, and people like the two of you who have been doing it for 30, 40, 50 plus years? What do you see in the new gardeners, or what advice do you give them?
Well, I think that many of them turn to the internet because I see these gardening groups, and so they'll ask the questions in these gardening groups, and people are wonderful about sharing their knowledge. And so I think that is a real wonderful way that people will tune in to, like Don's shows, and send him questions and emails to get answers to their gardening questions, or they'll talk to their neighbors. I see people, especially young people, the demand for native plants at the nursery where I work has skyrocketed since when I started 15 years ago. And so I think there's a lot of people that are more concerned about the environment, want to benefit pollinators, maybe want to do some planting for the butterflies and the bees and the pollinators in general. And so, an environmental awareness is maybe a change that I've seen. And if you watch TV, almost every ad, if you look at it, has got plants incorporated into the ad. So there's just a real renaissance.
And a comment that comes to mind is from old Professor Neil Holland, is experience is the best teacher. So with all of the things that we've been talking about, newer gardeners, we shouldn't be afraid just to jump in and try it. That's how we gain experience. The other quote of his that I loved is, "Count the day lost, you don't learn something new." So no matter how many years we've been gardening, I count the day lost if I don't learn something new about gardening. And that's what's so fun about the experience that you gain. It teaches you things, and there's always something new to learn about gardening.
Yep. And if you involve your kids, they'll eat some of those things too, as far as the vegetable garden.
Yeah, isn't
because
that true?
if they've
Snap
helped
peas
grow
and
it,
all kinds of fun things. Pulling a
exactly.
carrot out of the garden.
Yeah. We used to tell the kids, don't you go pick the peas, because it was reverse psychology, because you knew they'd be out there picking the peas. Well, how else am I going to get peas into those kids? And so if they thought that they could get a rise out of Mom, they were eating them. I didn't care. I could make a big deal out of it. But it was being accomplished. The point was being accomplished that they were getting fresh veggies, and so whatever you need to do, and if you can get them involved, that's fabulous.
Mary, it's been so great having you on the show. Thank you very much for coming by. It's been great to meet you, and it's been great hearing your stories, too. I really appreciate that, and we love the show.
Well, thank you so much for asking. I think that Don and I are kind of about twins the way we...
Well, anybody that involved in gardening, I think you could talk for days. But just because there's so much that you can relate to. Anybody that's dug in the soil, and John, it's always...
I was just thinking, like, this table, we should really just have, like, pieces of pie and coffee, because this has been much more of a social visit than it has been in an interview or a regular podcast. Mary, if people have questions for you or if they want to reach out to you, what's the best way to contact you?
They can probably, it's probably best to get a hold of me at Pioneer PBS TV station. And that is real easy to shoot an email there or call in there, and then they can forward the information to me because I'm usually outside.
Yeah.
and when I go out,
gardeners always aren't online.
And I don't always take the phone with me either, so people have learned that. So just mhome@pioneer.org.
That's great. And Don, if people have questions for you?
Donald.Kinzler, Kinzler, @ndsu.edu.
All right. Well, that's another episode for Growing Together, the gardening podcast, and we'll talk to you next week.